Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog Bulgar. Chapter 6. We have the beautiful Paula, which appears to be a statue on a square pedestal. Remarkable behavior of a bust of Kassar in the land of the slow movers. And it was on a square pedestal upon a platform that you have to step up and look at. The little baron is stepping from his right, putting his left hand at his hip and raising his right hand, and the dog stands on guard. How the elder baron and the baroness received Bulgar and me upon our return from our first voyage. I am decorated by the emperor with the Grand Cross of the Crimson Cincture. The elder baron presents me with a copy of an ancient Roman newspaper. I read of the murder of the beautiful Paula and the banishment by Kassar of the 7 sculptors to a faraway island in the southern seas. I resolve to set out in search of the island. My departure, trouble with crew, my sailing master loses his reason. I hear the cry, "Land ho!" It is the sculptor's island. Description of it, I go ashore. Paula's statue, adventures on the island. Bulgar makes a wonderful discovery. Something about the strange people who inhabit the island. Their habits, their pleasures, their characters. I am overtaken by an alarming melancholy. My awful dread at thought of becoming as one of the dwellers on the Sculptor's Isle. I learn of the existence of Antonius. I seek him. Vain endeavor to grasp his hand. Our interview. The strange and moving history of the 7 sculptors and their descendants. How they were transformed into the slow movers. Bulgar and I propose to leave the island. Extraordinary conduct of a bust of the great Kassar. Our farewell to the slow movers. Their adieu. Our good ship sails away. Upon my return from my first journey to faraway lands, the elder baron and his faithful spouse, my beloved mother, followed by all the retainers of the household, met Bulgar and me at the outer gate and welcomed us home with that wild and boisterous joy which only German hearts are capable of. The elder baron threw his arms around my neck and, forgetful of the fact that I was only half his size, lifted me completely off the ground in the unreasoning joy of a father's heart, nearly throttling me. I kicked vigorously, but the soft felt soles of my oriental shoes prevented me from giving him to understand that he was fast choking me to death. At last, my thoughtful mother noticed that I was growing black in the face, and, laying hold of my legs, pulled me downward out of the dangerous embrace in which the elder baron had wrapped me. Not, however, until my father's Nuremberg egg had bored painfully into my protuberant brow, adding another bump to that already bumpy territory. Upon noticing which, the elder baron dispatched an attendant to his apartment with orders to search his medicine chest for a bottle of volatile liniment. In his eagerness to undo the harm he had inflicted, he poured a stream of acrid liquid into my eyes, causing me intense suffering. This red and inflamed condition of my eyes, however, the tenants and retainers attributed to my emotion upon entering the baronial hall once more, after so long an absence. I didn't regret this little accident at all, for while I am opposed to that ready-made style of emotion which some people always keep on hand, I have no objections to a noble and dignified use of tears. It is needless to say that everybody was delighted to see Bulgar. They all found that he had increased in size, beauty, and intelligence. He received all this homage with a dignity that was charming to behold. To impress the crowd with a due sense of that discipline and self-control which he acquired as the constant companion and confidant of his master, he absolutely refused to touch the many tidbits and dainty morsels which the retainers offered him, and gazed with the utmost indifference at the other dogs in their mad scramblings for the food which he had declined. I was very proud of him. In a few days everything had settled down to its wonted quiet again beneath the baronial roof. Evenings and I passed giving accounts of the many wonderful things I had seen while abroad. To these sittings a few of the older and more confidential household servants were admitted. My good mother arranged them in a semicircle behind the chairs of the elder baron and his guests. I, with Bulgar by my side, occupied a dais, either seated by the side of a table, holding my curiosities, or standing in front of my auditors in an easy position while I held them spellbound by my narration. There was one thing that worried me, and it was this: how will the elder baron receive the announcement of my intention to leave him home again ere many moons? To my great surprise and delight, he didn't even wait for me to make known my intentions. While seated in my library one day, poring over a very rare book of travels which I had just purchased, a gentle tap at the door caused Bulgar to raise his head and give a low growl. "Come in," said I. It was the elder baron. "I disturb you," he began. "You have that right, baron," I replied, with a gracious smile. "Be seated, pray." And saying this, I arranged the pelt of a very beautiful and rare animal which I had killed while abroad, so as to make a comfortable seat for the elder baron on the canopy. "My son," said the baron, "I come to bring thee this little token from our gracious master, the emperor." I looked up. He held in his hand the insignia of the Grand Cross of the Crimson Cincture. I laid the bauble on the table. "Little baron," continued my father, "I am well pleased with thee." I made a low obeisance. "Thy marvelous adventures fill all mouths. Thou hast set a new luster on the family name, and I come to rouse thee from thy apartment sloth. Thou must be up and doing. Thou must shake off this indolence, which will gain an increased power over thee each passing hour. New triumphs await thee. Go forth once more. Turn aside out of the beaten paths. Seek the wonderful and marvelous, but ere thou settest forth, ponder the contents of this parchment roll. Many years ago, when the down of manhood first came upon my cheek, and before life's burdens had come to lie heavily on my soul, I found in it the damp and noisome vaults of an ancient Roman convent, which the pestilential air of an encroaching marsh had emptied of its inmates. It may turn thy footsteps towards something strange and interesting, concealing with difficulty the joy occasioned by my father's words and my earnestness to know the contents of the parchment roll. I returned the elder baron's salutation with marked respect, and he withdrew. I need not assure the reader of the almost breathless anxiety with which I unrolled the volume. It was in the Latin tongue, and was the work of a scribe. The ink had faded somewhat, but even in places where it had entirely disappeared, I could by the aid of a strong lens readily trace out the words by the lines scratched into the parchment by the point of the reed pen. It was a copy of an ancient Roman newspaper, our Acta Diurna, and bore a date corresponding to our 45th year before the present era. Caesar was at the height of his power. Peace reigned, the arts flourished. Rome, the center of the world, was the home of a glory and magnificence far beyond anything the eyes of man had yet gazed upon. The contents of this copy of the Acta Diurna were largely made up of detailed accounts of a famous trial just completed at Rome, in which 7 noted sculptors had been found guilty of poisoning a beautiful maid named Paula, after they had each completed a statue of her in order that no other sculptors should ever be able to make use of her for the same purpose. The judges had pronounced the sentence of death upon them, but in consideration of their splendid services in beautifying the imperial city, Caesar had changed their punishment from death to lifelong exile. The 7 sculptors had been transported in an imperial galley to a faraway island in the southern seas. As stated in this copy of the Acta Diurna, it was the most remote piece of land belonging to the Roman Empire, lying to the southward. Ad insulum remotissimum imperi Romani Medianorum. Remember that thing on the Life of Brian? They said I could live on an island somewhere. No, I'm kidding. That part. As an additional act of the imperial clemency, the wives and children of the condemned sculptors had been graciously accorded permission to follow their husbands and fathers into their terrible exile. When I had finished reading all the minute details of this strange crime and its awful results, I found that my blood was coursing through my veins with a mad violence. I paced the floor with such a quick and nervous step, and with agitation so plainly visible in my looks, that I was aroused from my reverie by the anxious whining of Bulgar, who was following me about the room close upon my heels. Why not go in quest of this faraway isle to which these 7 sculptors and their families were transported by command of great Caesar? Perchance, in that far distant isle dwells a race of beings who, forgetting the world and forgotten by it, will, by their strange habits and peculiar customs, so interest me as to repay me for all the dangers I may run in crossing untracked seas and turning aside from ocean paths. Perchance their descendants may be living yet. This idea now took possession of my whole being. Sleep was impossible. Far into the night, I pored over ancient charts, while deepest silence enwrapped the baronial halls. I worked out in my mind, or rather let my mind work out the course which I should pursue, for it was always a custom of mine never to attempt to solve the unsolvable. In fact, I early made the discovery that any interference on my part with the mysterious workings of my mind tended rather to impede its action. So, I waited calmly for light, and it came at last, closing my eyes with my inner sight. I could see a map of the eastern world traced in glowing, shimmering lines upon an inky background, and there too could I see my course marked out in dotted lines of fire. With a loud, ringing cry of joy, I sprang to my feet and exclaimed, "I shall find this wonderful isle. I shall unlock the portals of the southern seas. I shall gaze upon the descendants of Paula's murderers. Come, Bulgar, away, away. Hastily bidding adieu to my parents, I swung myself into the saddle, and with Bulgar securely strapped and Crope dashed madly away towards the shores of the Mediterranean. The Baron's mad son is off again, cried the peasants, as I galloped past their farmhouses. In 3 days I stood upon the deck of my vessel. In obedience to my orders, the captain's hand literally rested upon the helm. All that day he had been standing with his eyes riveted upon the shore, for something told him that I could not be far away. Everything was in readiness, even to the last biscuit. As Bulgar and I leaped over the rail, my good ship rounded to the wind and darted away like a thing of life. The blood tingled in my veins at sight of the blue waves and white, bellying sails. Bulgar gave vent to his satisfaction in mad gambols and ear-piercing barks. It was certainly an auspicious beginning. Leaving the command of the ship to the mate, the captain joined me in the cabin, where I unfolded to him my project of sailing in the southern seas in quest of a long-forgotten island. He made haste to unroll his chart and adjust his spectacles in order to fix the location of the island, when I should give him the latitude and longitude. Fancy his almost consternation when I told him that the only proof I had of the existence of such an island was the brief mention in the ancient Roman newspaper. Was I mad? Did I care no more for life than to throw it away in such a foolhardy undertaking? Had I no idea of the rage of the terrible typhoon, the treachery of the hidden reef, the weight of the watery mountains, which would topple on our deck? Could I expect seamen to go where there was no record that the most adventurous sailors of past centuries had ever plowed the water? I smiled. Master, said I, after a moment's silence, this ship is mine, and you have sworn to serve me like a true seaman. But if your courage has failed you, you should be put ashore at the first port we make. Go. Nay, little Baron, cried the skipper, I was only testing your resolution. If you have the courage to sail into unknown seas, I have the courage to follow you. Come bright skies and calm waters, or come storm clouds and thunderbolt. I shook the old man's hand and bade him go on deck, for at last sleep had come to my wakeful eyes, the first time in 3 whole weeks, and I wanted to be alone. In a few days, as we passed the Straits of Gibraltar and turned southward, keeping the African coast in sight, I passed my time perfecting myself in the Latin language, and often called forth very vigorous protestations from Bulgar by addressing him in that tongue and making use of him as a sort of audience before which I delivered my speeches after I had rounded them and polished them. The only stops we made now were for water or provisions. By daylight and starlight, my staunch ship bounded along on her course as if some friendly Nereids were pushing at her stern. In the long watches of the night, I lay in my hammock and pictured to myself that Roman galley as it bore those 7 exiles with kith and kin away from their beloved land forever. Ere another moon had bent her crescent in the evening sky, we had reached the Cape and came to anchor with the intent to overhaul our ship most thoroughly before going farther southward. This occupied several days. I chafed under the delay. 10 times a day I summoned the ship's master to my cabin and urged him to make greater haste. He bore with me most patiently. My heart gave a leap when at last I heard the master order the crew to set the sails. The seamen were singing and tugging away at the main sheets as I stepped upon the deck. How shall I head her, little Baron? Asked the master, raising his hand to his cap. Dead to the southward, I replied. He stood transfixed. He had thought that we would round the Cape and follow the usual course to the Indies. His lips move as if to protest. I cut him short, however, with an imperious wave of the hand. Several of the sailors, noticing the pallor which had overspread the captain's face, drew near and stood gazing upon us, half wonderingly, half inquiringly. "Captain," I said calmly, but quite loud enough to be overheard by the men standing in a group nearby, "my pistols were made by the Emperor's armorer. They never miss fire. Let me find you changing this vessel's course a single point east or west of south, and I'll kill you in your tracks." Saying this, I walked away. From that moment, all went well. The ship's master saw that I was determined to have my way even if I lost my life in consequence, and he yielded. Turning around to the group of sailors, I called out, "1,000 ducats to the man who at first sights land." A hearty cheer rent the air, and calling the Bulgar to follow me, I went below to think. That night I not only took the precaution to hang a lanthorn so that I could lie in my hammock and see a ship's compass at any time I might awake, but fearful lest some treachery might be attempted, I ordered my faithful Bulgar to sleep with his back against the door so that the least vibration would arouse him. Night after night, these precautions were followed out most strictly. During the day, too, my pistols were always in my belt. Yeah, don't threaten people, you know. Bulgar felt the danger I was in, and he, by his vigilance, gave me the advantage of eyes in the back of my head. A low growl warned me of the approach of the master or one of the crew. Thus protected and guarded, I felt that nothing save a general mutiny need be feared, and this I knew to be almost impossible, for a number of the crew were too devoted to me to listen to any traitorous proposals. They would have slain the master in cold blood had he dared to breathe the word mutiny. Things went very well for about 10 days, when I saw that a terrible struggle was going on in the captain's mind. I began to fear that he might lose his reason and throw himself into the sea. His face took on a yellow-greenish hue. He was literally dying of fright. One morning he threw himself upon his knees in front of me, and with tear-stained cheeks implored me to put back to the African coast again. I did all I could to quiet him, but in vain. His reason was slowly but surely giving way. Calling the mate to me, I put him in command of the vessel, and directed him to confine the captain to his cabin, and place a guard over him. It cut me to the heart to be obligated to do this, for the poor fellow begged like a dog to be left in command of his ship, but I was deaf to his entreaties. I felt that now all trouble was at end. The wind was blowing 15 knots an hour. Every stitch of sail had been crowded on. We fairly leapt out of the water like a thing of life, half flying, half swimming. Ever and anon I glanced at the compass. She was headed dead south. My cheeks tingled, and I could feel the flow of warm blood through every vein in my body. The moon went up like a shield of burnished gold. The sea glittered like liquid fire. Anon, a porpoise leaped into the air and sent 1,000 ripples circling away as he plunged into the water again. Our good ship cleft the glassy bosom of the sea like some huge black monster of the deep, and left a trail of fire in her wake as far as the eye could reach. Towards midnight I went to rest, but neither rest nor sleep was possible. Half undressing, I threw myself into my hammock, and Bulgar took his accustomed place at the door. The lanthorn was not strong enough to overcome the light of the full moon. It streamed through the bull's eye in a weird through the bull's eyes in weird, fantastic rays, and crowded my cabin with strange and mysterious forms. They were 7. Their faces and figures were godlike, so white, so beautiful were they. There was an indescribable sadness in their full dark eyes. They spake not a word. Suddenly, the paneling of the cabin ceiling parted and disclosed a staircase wrapped in dim, uncertain light. Adown these steps came a most gracious being, so white and fair and lovely that I gazed with bated breath. Down, down it came, nearer and nearer. She needed but wings to be an angel. But oh, her fair face was so filled with sorrow. Her lips were parted, her long black hair fell in confused tresses on her shoulders. She stepped into the cabin, and then, with a quick, dread look, her gaze fell upon the 7 bowed figures. Paula, they cried, and drew their white robes over their heads. Land ho, land ho. What, could I believe my ears? Land ho, land ho. With a bound, I sprang from my hammock and rushed upon deck. It was true. There, half a mile ahead of us, was a sight that stunned me like the blow of a bludgeon. Land it was, but not such a land as in my wildest dreams I had hoped to find. 10,000 lights glimmered on that mysterious shore and illumined the front of a Roman temple, whiter than milk. A marble staircase of the same hue led down to the very water's edge. A sacrifice was in progress. From the highest terrace, a column of black smoke curled slowly upward. No sound reached my ear. I stood almost bereft of my senses. At last, my power of speech returned. I ordered anchor to be cast, and, clinging to the shrouds of my good ship, gazed long and joyfully upon the entrancing scene. The land rose in natural terraces from the seashore, and no matter in what direction you looked, your eye caught glimpses of a graceful statue or group of statuary gleaming in the white moonlight amid the dark foliage like white-robed figures astray in a wood. It must be, I murmured to myself. I have found it, this Roman temple, this marble stairway, these groups of statuary, all point to the glorious success of my voyage of discovery. This is the sculptor's isle. How long I stood there, gazing upon this beautiful shore, I know not. Someone pulling gently at my sleeve roused me from my reverie. It was Bulgar. I stooped and stroked his head for a few moments. Suddenly, I awoke to a sense of great weariness, and casting another glance towards that mysterious shore, I turned and descended to the cabin. I soon fell into a deep sleep. The terrible strain upon my nerves since leaving the Cape, caused by the half-mutiny of the crew and the insanity of the ship's master, and the long watches through which I had lain and listened for the cry of land, had at last told upon me. The sun was several hours high when I sprang out of my hammock and rushed upon deck. Could it all have been a dream? Should I find the noble temple, staircase of marble, and all the towering statues melted away into thin air? Ah, no. That beautiful shore was still there, unrolled before my wondering eyes like some fair picture full of light and grace and delicious coloring. Man the launch, I called out, and in quicker time than it takes to tell it, I was on my way to the shore of the sculptor's isle. Faithful Bulgar sat beside me, his eyes bright and expressive as he gazed into my face. Landing at the foot of the marble stairway, I sprang lightly out of the launch, followed by Bulgar, and bounded up the marble steps. There were 3 landings before I reached the level of the temple, from each of which the outlook grew more and more delightful. In truth, it was a glorious approach to produce which art and nature had fairly outdone themselves. At length I cleared the last flight of steps, and with a throbbing heart crossed the tessellated court and paused in front of the entrance to the temple. The embers were still smoldering on the altar, around which stood several white-robed priests with low bowed heads and averted faces. Unwilling to break in upon their solemn office, I turned and followed a broad way, paved with marble and shaded by most graceful trees and trailing vines. At every step my eyes fell upon some statue of ravishing beauty, now nymphs, now goddesses, now Jove himself, now the great Caesar, now the fair Graces, now terrible Pluto, now smiling Charis, now the crescent-crowned Diana, accoutred for the chase, now dancing satyrs, now goat-footed Pan, now some Roman hero or statesman, and ever and anon came the figure of a maiden, wondrously fair, but with an unutterable look of sadness upon her beautiful face. So often did the same figure meet my gaze that I was led at last to approach its pedestal in hopes of finding some explanation. I gave a cry of pleasure as my eyes fell upon the name sculptured there. It was Paula. Now every doubt was dissipated. I had indeed found the sculptor's isle. Broad winding paths, leading right and left, now lured my footsteps. No fairyland could be more beautiful. Golden fruit glistened mid the dark green leaves. Flowers of countless hues bloomed on every side, sending forth the most delicate perfumes. Trailing vines, hung in graceful festoons, are twined around the pedestals of the statues, carrying their white blossoms to the whiter hands of these silent and motionless inhabitants of this region of loneliness. I say inhabitants, for as yet my eye had seen no living creature, save the priests grouped about the altar. Have I landed upon the shores of an island, upon which nature, with a lavish hand, has bestowed stately forests, placid lakes, purling brooks, trees laden with delicious fruits, plants waving their flowery tassels, and plumes in the perfumed air, vines trailing their rich, variegated foliage from tree to tree, a radiant sky above, a soil clad with velvety verdure beneath, only to find it abandoned, deserted of man, a thing of beauty, and yet loneliness, a mere polished and painted shell, out of which all life has gone forever. Such was the train of thought which busied my mind as I strolled along through these winding paths paved with marble, shut in by a leafy roof, through which ever and anon the sunlight burst to light up the masterpieces of the sculptor's art, around whose pedestals climbed and clambered scores of flowering vines, some carrying in their curved laps clusters of berries, brighter in hue than burnished gold, others holding out to the passer-by bunches of grapes, deeper in purple than the Lydian dye. As I pursued my way through this enchanted garden in which the swaying lily stalks bent their perfume-filled cups down to my cheeks, and trees dropped their gold and purple at my feet, fruit. Possibly pears and plums, gold and purple fruit. While deep in the bosky thicket of red-leaved shrubs and the silken tuft pine, the melancholy nightingale warbled his liquid melody in slow and plaintive measure. My heart yearned for the sound of a human voice. Would that some living being, I cried, no matter how bent and twisted in figure, or how discordant in voice, might come forth to meet me in this beautiful solitude. I noticed now that my path was ascending a gently sloping hillock. I quickened my pace, for I was anxious to stand upon some elevation so that I could command a more extensive view of the outlying country. As I gained the summit of the hillock, a scene of indescribable beauty met my gaze. As far as the eye could reach, I saw unrolled beneath me a landscape of such surpassing loveliness that I paused spellbound. Imagine a valley shut in by wooded heights, through which A silvery stream courses tranquilly. Here a forest giant spreads its far-reaching limbs, and there a clump of fruit trees display their load of golden treasures in the sunlight. On this side, flowering shrubs shine white as ivory against the dark greensward. On that width, trailing vines and trimmed copses. Man's hand has built many a shady bower of fantastic outline. To this add scores of statues posed in every conceivable attitude of grace and beauty. Here a group, there a single figure, and farther on by twos and threes, standing, reclining, sitting, at play, in meditation, listening, reading, thrumming stringed instruments, in attitudes of the chase, casting the quoit, or reaching up to pluck fruit or flowers. Is this a dream? I murmured. Am I not the sport of some mischievous spirit of the place? From this deep reverie, the loud barking of Bulgar aroused me with shock-like violence. I looked in the direction of the sound. Poor foolish dog. He was gambolling about one of the statues and amusing himself in waking the echoes with his voice. I was a little nettled by the interruption and called to him to cease his barking. It seemed to me almost a sacrilege to disturb the deep repose of this fair valley. Again, the barking broke forth. This time Bulgar's strange antics were wilder than before. He seemed barely beside himself, bounding around and around the statue, which was that of a young man in the act of reaching aloft for fruit or flowers and giving vent to a sort of half-anger, half-mischief, in a series of barks, growls, and whinings. Rare indeed was it that Bulgar did not give heed to my wishes, no matter how faintly expressed, but now not even a threatening tone of voice seemed to have the slightest effect upon him. He continued his mad gambolling and sharp, angry barking, determined to reproach him most severely for his disobedience. I strode angrily toward him. I drew near, I looked, I saw. Ashes of my forefathers, what? The statue had wide-opened eyes. The statue had the blush of life on its cheeks. Motion, movement, even to a hair's breadth, there was none, and yet these fair blue eyes were bent upon Bulgar in half-inquisitive, half-wondering gaze. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. I took a step forward. Suddenly a wave of fear crept over me, like the flow of icy water. Would the living marble, as it warmed to life, moved by some long pent-up passions, raise its hand and strike me dead? Gathering myself together, I glanced toward a group of maidens at play beneath the shade of a leafy roof of arched branches and interlacing vines. Quicker than it takes to tell it, I sprang forward and fixed my gaze upon their faces. Death could not hold the human form in attitude more motionless than theirs, and yet their eyes were filled with strange light. Upon their fair faces, the red tint of life glowed, bright and warm. Where was I? A strange feeling of half dread, half delight, now swept over me. And still, I dared not speak. My voice will break the spell by which all these breathing children of earth's flinty breast keep their hold on life, and they will fade away to nothingness. And now the eyes of her nearest me, of deeper black than polished coal, appeared bent full upon me. I could see, I thought, the glisten of those ebon orbs, as if a tear had broken over them, as if a terror broken over them. Her hand was outstretched. What if I touch it, thought I, to see if it have the warmth of life within it, or whether it be not in truth a thing of stone, and I the sport of some mischievous spirit of the island. I'll do it, if I'm slain like a poor worm, which, warned by an approaching flame, crawls to meet it. I touched its fingertips. Oh, wondrous thing! They were not of stone, but of softest, warmest flesh. I staggered back, expecting to see the group vanish in thin air, but no, it moved not. It stood as motionless as before. And now I felt my limbs grow strong beneath me. I determined to speak, come evil or come good. Fixing my gaze upon their fair young faces, I uncovered and addressed them thus. O strange and mysterious beings, resent not this bold intrusion of a puny mortal upon your sacred repose. Speak to me, if ye so will. Let me take my feet off the soil of your fair island. But ere I go, speak to me. Let me know whether ye be not the creations of some spirit of this isle, or whether ye are really living, breathing beings. No sound issued from those rosy lips, parted as if in the very act of speaking. No movement, no tremor, came to break the marble-like pose of these fair figures. A whole minute elapsed. To me it seemed like an eternity. I stood riveted to the ground in most anxious suspense. The minutes dragged their heavy bodies along one after another, but joy unutterable. Their lips began to move. A smile, almost imperceptible at first, spread slowly over their faces. The crimson of their cheeks takes on a deeper hue. Their eyes bend a most sweet and friendly look upon me. The word "we" falls gently on my ear. Another pause. I lean forward in most painful suspense to catch the next faint syllable. It came at last. Live. They live, I cried in a loud and joyous voice. They live! I am not the sport of any strange divinity. These figures are not cold and senseless marble, but warm-blooded, breathing, thinking, living beings. I cannot tell you the depth of my satisfaction that this discovery was made by my loved Bulgar. He saw the terrible perplexity which had come upon his master, and hastened to his rescue. Not frowning face, not threatening voice, was sufficient to turn him from his purpose of letting me light in upon my darkened mind. In my deep contrition, I could scarcely bring myself to speak his name. I felt how unworthy of his love I was. But he pardoned me with a nobility of character more than human, and spake his forgiveness by covering my hands with caresses and uttering a series of soft, low barks. With Bulgar by my side, I now mingled with these flesh and blood companions of the island's marble dwellers, passing from one group to another in speechless wonderment. In good faith, they were alive, but not more so than the flowers, the shrubs, the trees, the vines, which helped to make up the lovely scene of which they were the brightest and fairest ornaments. The vines moved from place to place more rapidly than they. The flowers opened their buds more quickly than the maidens did their lips. Like beautiful figures of wax, moved by the slow uncoiling of some hidden spring, these living statues passed hours, nay days, in rising to their feet or sinking down upon the velvety greensward. For several hours I stood watching the white hand of a maiden as it reached forward with imperceptible motion to pluck a red-cheeked peach which hung beside her. A full hour went by ere these delicate fingers were clasped around the peach. Another ere it had been carried to her lips. There, all day long, she held it pressed, but as the sun went down behind the wooded hills, it fell from her loosened grasp and rolled towards my feet. I slowly stooped, for I was not long in discovering that my quick movements pained these animated statues, and picked it up. I could feel that some of the pulp had been drawn from the luscious fruit, but the skin was hardly broken. So gently had she fed upon it. At this moment, seeing a smile upon the face of one of the maidens, I turned to find upon whom she bent her gaze. It was a handsome youth who stood perhaps 50 feet distant, with his eyes fixed beamingly upon the maidens. Surely, thought I, affection will, as in other lands, quicken their movements. They will advance toward each other somewhat rapidly now. But no, the long twilight yielded, little by little, to the deeper shadows. Night came. The moon set her glowing disk in the heavens, and yet that youth was not near enough to clasp the hand of the maiden he loved. From the first coming of the twilight, smiles have been slowly gathering upon the faces of the other youths and maidens whose eyes were turned upon the lovers. At this moment a gentle haw fell upon my ear, and after the lapse of half an hour, another and louder haw followed it, to be, after a still longer pause, followed by still another haw. This last haw was lengthened out into a clear and ringing note, which lasted several seconds. Then it grew fainter and fainter, and died away like a spent echo. Their mirth was over. As I was threading my way among these living statues, one morning I came upon a group of children at play. At first, I could not see that they had noticed my coming at all, but after the lapse of a quarter of an hour, I discovered that their large, beautifully clear eyes were slowly turning toward me. So I determined to sit down nearby and observe them, fancying my delight upon finding that a delicate thread-like flowering vine had twined around and around the body of a little golden-haired maid about 7, encircled her neck with its many-colored leaves and coral berries, and coiled itself like a crown of gold and crimson upon her soft ringlets, dropping its blossoms and tendrils gently down around her head and shoulders. Seeing my astonishment and hearing my words of delight, a mild-faced woman seated near me slowly raised her hands and extended her fingers to make me understand that these little cherubs had been 10 days at play there upon the ground. This beautiful vine, thought I, has joined in their sport. As much alive as they, it is, in truth, one of their playmates, and has wound itself lovingly around the child seated nearest to it. I looked again. Lo, a tree loaded with delicious nuts was swinging in the breeze and shaking them into the laps of these children at play, while on the other side a tall, graceful plant, bearing cup-shaped flowers of sunny whiteness, each of which, I noticed, was filled with limpid water, drops of which sparkled in the sunlight like polished gems, gently brushed against the cheek of a smiling boy, as if to say, "Drink, dear little brother." "Wonderful," cried I. "These happy creatures, these trees and flowers, these fruits and vines, are all children of the same family. No storms ever come to darken these fair skies. Eternal spring reigns here. By daylight, starlight, and moonlight, their lives flow gently along like some broad, silvery stream, whose motion is too slow for a human eye to note it. Mysterious people, how shall I fathom the wonderful secret of your existence? How shall I read the history of a people whose only books are speechless brooks and silent groves, whose tongues have so lost their power to interpret thought that months might go by, and yet the mystery remains unsolved? After a sojourn of a few days among the slow movers, as I shall call them, I made a discovery which alarmed me greatly. I found that this mysterious silence, this strange fate which cast me among living creatures with whom converse was next to impossible, this utter inability to distinguish the living statues from the marble ones, was beginning to prey upon my mind. Bulgar noticed my ever-increasing melancholy, and exerted himself to amuse and comfort me. I responded but poorly through his 1,001 cunning tricks and laughable antics. In fact, I felt that my mind was gradually yielding to some dreadful influence which pervaded the very air, and which, even hour by hour, so gained in strength that I realized the necessity of making a superhuman effort to break away from the power it had already acquired over me, or else become myself a living statue and brother to the forms of flesh and marble which inhabited this wonderland. I will not weary my readers with minute details of the plan which I had conceived to end the danger which threatened me, to snatch myself from the living death which I could already feel creeping over me. In my despair, I determined to apply to the oldest of the slow movers and throw myself upon his mercy, so to speak, and to tell him of my longing to escape from the terrible fate threatening me, to return home to my beloved parents, who would go down in sorrow to their graves if I, their sole child, their pride and their hope, should never come again to gladden their old age. But more than this, I determined, if possible, to learn the history of the island and its mysterious folk, and to that end I resolved to beseech him to indicate to me where I might find some record of their past, some book or parchment, so that I might not go through life burdened with the brain-racking thought that I had been powerless to solve this mystery, a thought which, if it did not shorten my days, would most surely embitter them. As I have already explained, in attempting to converse with the slow movers, I was confronted with a twofold difficulty. In the first place, though I might burst with impatience, yet must I preserve a perfectly calm and placid exterior. And in the second place, when after the long and wearying delay, it came my turn to make reply, that reply must not exceed the snail's pace of the slow mover's speech, else their bright eyes clouded up, and they seemed absolutely paralyzed by the rapidity of my utterance. Their eyelids sank slowly down, and they seemed to fall into a deep slumber, out of which it took hours to arouse them. At the first streak of dawn I sought out the aged slow mover, whom I had often noted in his leafy temple, seated on a marble pediment, his eyes fixed on the silent stream which bathed the very roots of the trees, whose wide-spreading branches helped to roof over his habitation. All that day and the starry night which followed it, I sat at his feet. Picture to yourself my utter despair at learning that not a word, or a line, nor a leaf, or a parchment was in existence which might end my fearful anxiety. I say fearful, for stronger and stronger, hour by hour, grew the impulse to put an end to this life of useless, senseless activity, and join the throng of living statues, into whose heart no vain regrets came to darken their placid dream life. On the morning of the second day, a thought burst upon my mind. It was this: perchance there may dwell somewhere on this isle some one living creature, who, unlike his brothers, may possess the power of rapid speech, whose tongue, for some reason or other, may have stayed loosened. I reasoned thus. In every land there were opposites, good and bad, beautiful and ugly, graceful and awkward, swift and slow. Surely on this isle must live some contrasts as these. True, it may be an exception, but it would be most wonderful if it did not exist. All that day I spent in imparting unto the aged slow mover my train of thought. It was deep in the twilight ere I had succeeded in putting the question to him, whether there was not some living creature dwelling on this island whose powers of speech were more like mine, and to whom I might, in my ever-increasing dread of transformation into a slow mover, flee for refuge from myself, for satisfaction of the irresistible longing pressing on my very soul. But the shades of evening were not so deep that I could not note the darker shadow which began to gather on the face of the aged slow mover when I had completed my question. I was startled. So violent were the beatings of my heart that they sounded loud, though muffled, above the sighing of the zephyr, the rustle of the leaves, the plaintive warbling of the nightingale, as the shadow went on growing ever deeper and deeper. On the old man's visage I felt that I had touched some ancient wound which, though long forgotten, now bled afresh. His lips parted, his head sank slowly, slowly, a sigh came forth, so full of meaning, so like a tale-bearer of some long hidden sorrow, that I feared for the worst. My limbs stiffened, I could feel the blood lessen its pace in my veins and go groping along as if uncertain of its way. I pressed the tips of my fingers to my cheeks. They were cold as polished marble. I essayed to speak. The words would not come. At last I made a violent effort. "Bulgar," I whispered. Poor dog, he slept at my feet. I struggled to escape the spell for one brief moment, that I might stoop to give my faithful friend a farewell caress. Hist! The slow mover spoke. "Son," I was saved. He had aught to say to me. The spell was broken. My heart began to beat again. The warm blood ran tingling through my veins. It was a narrow escape. Already my fingertips had cooled. Another moment, and I would have joined the throng of slow movers and become a brother to the marble dwellers on the sculptor's isle. All that night the aged slow mover talked to me, and when the sun went up, I knew all. I knew the secret which had so darkened his placid countenance. I knew the cave in which dwelt the hermit of the sculptor's isle, an outcast, a prisoner, shut in between the narrow walls of a cavern by the sea, for no fault of his, for no sin, for no wrong. Nature had so willed it. Why the aged slow mover knew not. Antonius was the name which the hermit bore. When morning came, I sought him out. I found him seated by his cavern's portal, looking out upon the glory of the eastern sky. This was the secret of his exile. Some cruel fate had in his youth visited him with a dread disease not unlike that which is known as St. Vitus's dance. When the fit was upon him, not only did he lose all control over his limbs, so that his feet bore him whither he willed not to go, and that too with extreme rapidity, but his arms likewise executed the most rapid and vigorous gestures. Now in apparent anger, now entreaty, now wonder, you will readily understand why ill-fated Antonius came to be banished from the midst of the slow movers. Although their brother, and deeply beloved of them, his lightning-like rapidity of motion, his violent gestures, his almost ceaseless change of attitude not only offended the slow movers, it dazed them, it shocked them, it checked the sluggish flow of lifeblood within their veins, and threatened them all with slow but certain death. He must go. He did. Antonius was banished to the cavern by the sea, where never came sound save the ocean's roar, when lashed by the demons of the gale, are its sad murmur and ceaseless break and splash in its moments of slumber and rest. But most terrible of all the manifestations of the unfortunate Antonius' fearful ailment was the utterly wild and ungovernable rapidity of his speech. Like maddened steeds, tongue and lips rushed along. To the eyes and ears of the slow movers, such a violently expressive face, such mad rapidity of utterance, were death itself. Not one brief month would have found a living statue in that home of flinty hearts had Antonius not gone. Antonius was thankful for that dread decree, which housed him forever in the cavern by the sea. He saw the sufferings of his people, and though his eyes in that brief time wept more tears than all his brethren ever had shed in their sluggish lives, yet were they but a poor proof of the awful grief he felt. Antonius turned towards me as I approached the spot where he sat wrapped in deep meditation. A sad but withal kindly smile flitted about his lips, like the quick but faint glimmer of the lightning in the distant sky. He rose. I paused to await his bidding to approach him. He spake not a word, but stretched out his hand. I bounded forward to clasp it and press it to my lips. At that instant, the fit fell on him. I could see the look of pain which flashed across his face. Away he glided, now backward, now forward, now sidewise, now obliquely, his hand outstretched in a desperate effort to reach me, who with equal desperation advanced and retreated in a mad endeavor to grasp what constantly eluded me. Bulgar, utterly unable to comprehend this wild dance among the rocks of that cavernous shore, followed my heels, barking furiously. I could take no time to quiet him. Away, away sped Antonius, with redoubled speed, his right hand extended towards me, as if with a pitiful prayer, grasp it and thus end the fit which was shaking his limbs so furiously. Pausing to catch my breath, I again pursued the flitting figure with a determination to overtake it or perish in the attempt. At last it seemed to circle in smaller and ever smaller rings. Now was my time. I sprang upon that whirling form with a sort of mad desperation to seize and hold its outstretched hand. At length I held it, but no. His body had come to a rest, but now high over my head, now at my feet, now flashing up one side, now down the other, now whizzing in front of my eyes, now encircling my head like a bird in swift flight. That hand went on, ever on in its wild and mysterious course. My strength was failing me. Shall I ever be able to grasp it? Antonius, too, showed signs of yielding to the awful power of the dread disease which tormented him. His face took on a strange pallor. His breast heaved convulsively. With one last, despairing effort, I succeeded in catching his hand in its flight around my head. I clung to it with desperate vigor. My touch dispelled the venom from his veins. He seemed to awake as from some awful dream. He passed his hand across his eyes. He smiled. Still clinging to his hand, I gently forced him to be seated upon a rocky bench over which the ocean had woven a velvety covering of seagrass and weeds. Antonius, I cried, peace come upon thee. Forget thy suffering. Be as thou once wert. My touch can give thee rest at last for a brief respite. He pressed my hand. A deep sigh lifted his breast. It was the last gasp of the demon which oppressed him. He was now at rest. To me his utterance was rapid, but not more so than that of many quick thinkers with whom I had conversed. What wouldst thou? Said he, in a low but strangely sweet, mild voice. I unfolded to him the object of my coming. I went back to the finding of the Roman newspaper and my departure from home. All, I told him all. How I had come into the home of the slow movers, how I had mistaken them for marble like the rest of the figures about the island, how I longed to have the mystery cleared up. All that day Antonius and I sat by the sea in a most delightful converse. Only once, at high noon, did he set a brief limit to his tale while we passed into his cavern to partake of food and drink. With a high, bounding heart, I listened to his story of the landing of the 7 sculptors upon the isle. Their first task had been to rear the glorious temple with its long flight of marble steps leading down to the sea Then they, and later their sons and their sons' sons, had set to work to people this beautiful island with almost countless figures of the rarest grace and finish, in the forests, by the river's banks, through the valley, on the hillside, adown the terraces, to the very water's edge, rose the faultless statues in wondrous beauty and profusion, here, there, and everywhere. Forms of matchless grace gleamed snow white amid the leafy bowers or tangled underwood. A mysterious ardor burned within the hearts of these exiled artists. It would seem that theirs was a wild sport of hope to rear on that far distant isle another Rome, an infant daughter, but fairer and whiter in her marble magnificence than the glorious mother who sate upon her 7 hills. Times and times again, a thrice 70, the wretched Paula arose out of the quarried blocks, ever fairer and even fairer, now bent in awful grief, now putting the very skies to shame, with the entrancing beauty of her upturned, pleading, sweet and pitiful face. Here and there, too, stood great Caesar, never to be forgotten for his godlike clemency in snatching the sculptors from terrible death. As the 2nd century of the exile dawned upon the little Roman kingdom, far away beneath the southern skies, at the very moment when the colony was waxing strong and vigorous, a strange and mysterious thing happened to the dwellers in this island home of sweet content. No more male children were born. The 7 sculptors, now bent with age and their faces hollowed by the sharp chisels of remorse, went, one after the other, to the dark realm of death. Their sons, too, came into ripe manhood, and their sons grew up happy in the possession of that glorious talent which had peopled the isle with such matchless forms of beauty. But now the race had reached the end of its long reign in the world of art. Decade after decade slipped away, and still there came not one male child to gladden a sculptor's home. A sort of blank despair sank upon the colony. The elder sculptors laid their chisels down in utter hopelessness. Even the younger wrought less and less. Still there came no boy to wake the old-time song and laughter of that once joyous island home. Fingers cunning in art grew stiff with age. Hearts full of glorious inspiration waxed dull and spiritless. One by one they all went the way which mortal feet must tread. A terrible, a wonderful change came over the people. Weighed down by this leaden grief, surrounded day and night by these speechless, motionless, marble forms, which, although silent as the very clod itself, yet cried out unceasingly, "Give us more companions in these solitudes." These unfortunate people almost turned to marble itself. They became, in good sooth, brothers and sisters to the marble dwellers on this island. At length the end came. The last sculptor was laid upon the carved bier of the great white temple by the sea. A silence so long, so deep, so dreadful fell upon the people that it almost seemed their speech was lost forever. Within the dark grottos and bosky underwood, they crawled to hide away from the very light of day. Their limbs, once so supple and elastic, ever ready to bear their owners over hill and across plain, delighting in the dance, inured to the race, now became heavy and slow. They seemed almost about to turn to stone and join the silent company around them. In good sooth, such a fate was imminent, when the happening of a joyful event averted it. A year had passed since the last sculptor had gone to join the shadowy caravan which moves forever across the desert of eternal silence, when his 7 sad-faced daughters were fairly startled by an infant's cry. But look, their widowed mother stands before them with the babe nestled in her arms. It is a son. The joyful tidings can only creep from family to family. Alas, it was too late to call them back to old-time customs and habits, too late to start their blood again in old-time bounding, leaping course through their veins. They were a changed people. True, their happiness came again, but it was not the same. They could smile and laugh, but it was scarcely more than faces of marble, moved by some mysterious power. They could talk, but so slowly fell the words that it almost seemed some statues spoke. Amid the leafy coverts of this island, they could move, but snail or tortoise outstripped them with ease. They were changed indeed, faded henceforth to people their beautiful island home with living statues. For years, in long flight, sped away, till one century followed another, and yet the wondrous talent came back no more. It was lost forever. Long, long ago, too, the people forgot the story of their fathers. It is kept alive in the hearts of a few chosen ones, and they hand it down each quarter century to younger keepers selected for the purpose. To Antonius, the secret had been thus confided, and such was the tale he told to me. With a light heart, now that its weight of doubt and uncertainty had been lifted from it, I bade Antonius farewell, and followed by Bulgar, wended my way back to the abodes of the slow movers. As I passed through one of the groves, peopled with marble forms, I paused, I hardly knew why, in front of an admirable bust of the great Caesar. Well, there were a bunch of them, right? Was it Julius? Was it Augustus? Or which one? Bulgar joined me, and there we stood, children of this late day, with our eyes uplifted to the face of him whose smallest word was once copied down on a waxen tablet as if it were the utterance of a god. I'd always liked Caesar. We resembled each other in many ways. We were both men of action. Well, what is he, 9 years old now, or is he still 8? I felt sorry for him now, that he should be forced to live, even in the shape of marble, among such dull and inactive people as the slow movers. I told him so, and yet Julius, said I, called of men the great Caesar, what a fortunate thing it is that thou art not living now, for thou wouldst be overcome with shame at finding everybody reading my adventures, while the book which thou wrotest concerning Gaul lies mouldy and dust-covered on the shelves of the libraries. The following day, when passing that way again, and glancing up at great Caesar's face, I noticed that a smile had just started in the right corner of his mouth. So stolid had he become through his long residence among the slow movers that he had just begun to be amused by the remark I had made on the previous day. Thoughts of home now arose in my mind. The fact is that shortly after my interview with Antonius in his cavern by the sea, Bulgar had commenced to show unmistakable signs of homesickness, so I dispatched him with a note to the officer of my vessel to begin preparations at once for the return voyage. Bulgar made haste to execute the commission. He proceeded to the foot of the marble staircase, and then by loud barking attracted the attention of the officer whom I had left in command. He sent a boat ashore, and Bulgar met it with my letter in his mouth. To tell the truth, I would have fain lingered for a week or so longer among the slow movers, but it was plain to be seen that they were growing restive at my presence. On the cheeks of many of them, all signs of ruddy peach bloom had disappeared. Day by day, they grew more and more like their marble brethren. My quick movements so wearied their eyes that after a few hours' stay in their midst, I found myself surrounded by a company of deep sleepers. Nor dared I speak, for no matter how I softened my voice or how slowly I uttered my words, they jarred upon the delicate ears of the slow movers, and signs of suffering gradually passed over their faces. My resolution was therefore quickly formed. With a snail's pace, I passed from group to group, from bower to bower, from grove to grove, saying in a soft and measured tone, "Farewell, farewell." Then I directed my steps toward the white temple by the sea, for I knew my boat's crew were waiting for me at the foot of the marble staircase. As I passed in front of great Caesar's statue, I turned to wave a last adieu. What saw I, think you? Why, that same smile which had begun in the right corner of his mouth several days ago had crossed over to the other side of his face and was just at the left corner of his mouth. On the right side, whence it had come, all was as stern and calm as when he sat enthroned at Rome and ruled the world. Several hours later, as we were busy setting the sails of my good ship, there fell upon my ear, in a soft, echo-like tone, the word "fair." The slow movers had begun to speak their adieu. The winds were favorable, the sails filled. As the sun went down, pouring a flood of golden light upon the beautiful marble staircase, the great white temple, and the many snowy statues, which gleamed so bright and fair amid the dark foliage of the trees and vines upon the terraces of that mysterious island, I threw myself upon the deck with intent to keep my eyes fixed upon the lovely scene as long as possible. My good ship sailed away in deepest silence, for I had given orders that no one should speak above a whisper. Now, the sculptor's isle had faded to a mere speck in the horizon, and now, in the gathering shades of night, it was swallowed up and lost forever. My heart grew heavy. Bulgar nestled his head in my lap, with his loving eyes fixed full upon me. Sleep overcame us both. The sky was star-studded when we awoke. The cool night wind had refreshed me. I sprang up with the intention of going below. At that instant, there came floating along on the evening breeze, like a mountain echo nearly spent, a soft, mysterious sound. My ear caught it. It was, "Well." The slow movers had finished speaking their adieu.